afternoon, and thank you for joining us on Across the Fence. I'm Jolie Whitney. This is the second part of a conversation we started yesterday about food security in Vermont. If you missed part one, you can visit our YouTube channel to see our conversation about the definition and implications of food security for people as well as for Vermont. And I'm joined again by Becky Warren. She's the Food Security Coalition's manager for the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund. She was one of many hands who helped develop this document, program, and project, Food Security in Vermont, Roadmap to 2035. Thank you for coming in and joining us.
Thank you.
We're happy to have you 2 days in a row. And of course, we're talking about this project, and it mentions 2035 and kind of reaching that goal. Is that a bold prediction? Is that in the cards?
Well, we talked yesterday about how the Vermont Food Security Roadmap was made, and it shows us how to ensure everyone in Vermont has the food that they need at all times. And the roadmap was made out of conversations and suggestions and the experience of people in Vermont. And we heard resoundingly from across the state, we can do this, we have the resources to do it, let's collaborate and get it done. We don't have any more time to waste. And I think in part, this was because we started the process during the pandemic when we all became so much more aware of how brittle our food system is. And so folks were really thinking about those empty grocery shelves, about the concern that there wouldn't be food, about the rise in food security loss across the state. And so really what we heard is let's get this done. So we thought, okay, let's do it by 2035. And let's lay out some super clear action steps to get there together.
And it sounds urgent, but also optimistic, the conversations you had.
Yeah, they were very optimistic. Generally, people felt that we can do it here. And if we can do it here, if it can happen anywhere, that we can make a place where none of our neighbors are hungry, where we know no hidden hunger exists, like how good will that feel when we know we can wake up in the morning and think, I know all my neighbors are fed right now. And that was really what we heard from across the state is it's a priority to get there.
And a lot of it kind of boils down to access when we're talking about food security. Can you talk about what that looks like?
Yeah, I think it's, access is basically, can you get the food that you need? And sometimes we think about physical access, right? Like, do you live in a town where there's a grocery store that can actually provide a well-rounded diet for you, a diet that you want? And so that's one part of access. And as we know, there are many parts of the state where there aren't really full-service grocery stores anymore. And so people have to drive 30, 45 minutes to get to a grocery store. They might not have a car. Transportation is a huge barrier to physical food access in Vermont. And then another type of barrier is economic access, and we talked about this yesterday. And that's why in the roadmap we really are prioritizing, let's make sure people have the resources they need to purchase the food that they want, because that can be a big issue also, right? It's just simply not having the flexible money to buy the food that you need and your family needs. And then a third type of access that we think of maybe less often is social access. So is the grocery store, is the food that you want to buy, is it safe for you to go there? And so for a lot of folks who might feel like they're experiencing bigotry in their community or in their grocery store, that would be a social barrier to food. And so we really have to think about that too. And that's part of why different groups might have higher rates of lack of food security across the state.
And to kind of build on that, how prominent is that kind of inequality in our food system in Vermont?
It's unfortunately fairly prominent. I mean, if you think about, so inequity is when people in a certain group, whether that's like a geographic group, like people living rurally, or people in an age group, like senior citizens, if more people in that group are more likely to lack food security, then that's inequity, right? So, because you can see a trend. And it's really true in Vermont that it is inequitable who has food security and who doesn't. So people who live in rural areas, like we were just saying, have less food security. People who live with a disability, people who live in poverty, senior citizens, and people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, higher rates of food insecurity there. And also with people who are Black and Indigenous, people of color. And those are just inequitable trends that exist and have been studied by our researchers at UVM and exist nationwide. And so what the roadmap is saying is, okay, let's make food security for everybody. And when we specifically address the gaps that are creating a lack of food security for these communities, we know the whole state will have food security, and that will be a great day.
Sure, yeah, high tides raise all ships there.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And we talked a little bit in our last program about kind of flooding and what that looks like in the roadmap, but would you consider food security kind of hand in hand with climate resilience?
I would. Yeah, we did talk about that yesterday. I think if you look at resiliency, and that's our ability to bounce back, how well are we bouncing back? And I think it's hard to think of bouncing back from something like the floods that we experienced this summer. It's been more of a slogging out of the mud type of thing rather than a bounce. And there's many aspects to resolving what happened with the flooding this summer and last summer, but a big part of it is making sure that people have the food that they need and that their food is safe, that it's nutritious, and that there's enough of it. And so that is a big focus on the roadmap. In fact, actually one exciting thing we were able to do this past session with the legislators was work on an emergency management bill that didn't include food until we started talking with the legislators, and they said, oh, you're right, we need to be planning also for food access as we lay out how we're going to manage emergencies in the state. And that was something we identified in the roadmap as a really priority action, and so we're already starting to work on that, and that's going to be exciting and bring a lot of benefits to us.
And we've talked about flooding a lot, which is more of an emergency climate issue, but trends have also showed that Vermont has been getting drier over the last few years, which obviously kind of feels in contrast to that. But is handling maybe the drier weather or those long-term climate issues also part of the roadmap?
It is, because what we're looking at is how are farms doing is a big part of it. We want to put our farms at the center of Vermont's food security, because that's pretty much where we have them all the time anyway, as Vermonters. And so we're looking at, okay, we're going to have more extreme weather, that's droughts and huge precipitation events. So what can we do in the state to set it up so that if our farms have a disaster, it doesn't mean they're wiped out of business? So we're thinking a lot about and starting to talk with elected officials about what would it be like to set up a permanent way to help assist Vermont farms when they're in a disaster. Because, Vermont, we have a lot of small farms, and we don't always qualify for federal programs that might apply to huge soybean producers in the Midwest. We just don't have huge soybean producers, and our dairy farms are even relatively small. So Vermont, I think, will need to have Vermont-sized solutions for our Vermont-sized farms.
And you talked on this a little bit yesterday, but when we're talking about maybe elected officials, what kind of things are we looking at this next legislative session to help make another step forward on this roadmap?
I think we talked about a lot of the ones that we know we're bringing forward to help them make great policy choices and really be in leadership on this. So we're talking about setting up, in partnership with the food bank, a way to always have food at the ready in Vermont to deploy when there's an emergency. We're talking about how can we set up a program in Vermont that could always be there to support our farms when they're devastated by these flooding events. We're looking at, okay, what would it take just to add this pre-existing option we could take for folks who are on 3 Squares Vermont to use their benefits at a restaurant. I don't know if you remember when the restaurants were all working very hard during the pandemic to provide food to folks who were suffering from food insufficiency. And so that program was so inspiring and exciting and really brought together restaurants, farmers, and the community members who needed food. And it was such a beautiful collaboration where everyone's needs were getting met at the same time. So it's actions and implementation of programs like that we're really excited about.
Yeah, so lots of stuff kind of underway this next year.
Yeah, really looking at pulling together what can the government do, how can we support our farms, how can communities be supported, and the solutions they want to give.
And we've talked about the legislature a good amount, but how about on local governments? Are you including kind of your small town municipality in the plan?
Yeah, there are definitely roles for local municipalities, especially with emergency planning, especially with having the resources that they need to understand what happens in emergency, how do they communicate, where are the resources, so all those pieces, which I have to say involve a lot of acronyms, but are really important.
Absolutely. Sometimes the most acronyms are important. And we're talking a lot about making sure people have access, but we also want to care for the people who are helping to make our food. Can you talk a little bit about making sure that people who work on the farms are treated ethically and other issues like that?
Yeah, that is such a great topic that was really on top of mind for a lot of folks who gave the expertise and input on the roadmap. And looking at how people who are employed in the food system in Vermont are treated, and especially people who are might not have documents, legal documents to be living here, thinking about all those things. How do we make sure that farmers, as business owners, have the resources to be paying their employees well, And so a big part of that is how do we reach those employees and make sure that they have the food security that they need? And then also how do we bolster and bring up farms in Vermont? You know, an extension across the fence and extension are so deeply involved in celebrating and lifting up and helping our farms become profitable. And so that all of that work is part of ensuring that everyone who works in the food system has a job that is safe and secure and positive.
Sure, so it starts both with the top level, making sure farms are well treated, and at the bottom level as well.
Yes.
Absolutely. And now let's talk, before we wrap up, about the role of kind of like healthcare in this, and making sure that healthcare is a piece of the puzzle for having this food security. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, the Vermont Department of Health actually was sort of the beginning of the moment when we started being able to create this plan. Food security, nutritional security are huge indicators of whether your body is healthy, you have good mental health. So the Department of Health is very invested in making sure that folks are fully food secure and that our whole state enjoys food security. And one thing that's really exciting in the roadmap is connecting to efforts that they're making at healthcare centers to use contacts with the health system as a way to find out, are people having issues with food security? So now when I go to my clinic, every time I go, I have a intake question about have I had enough food in my house in the last month, in the last 12 months to feed my family.
Sure, I know I've filled one of those out
good.
as well.
Yeah. So that is one way that the healthcare system is identifying who needs food support, who needs food security support in our communities. And so in my clinic, I asked, well, what would happen if I did say yes on some of these? And they said, well, we would connect you with our community nurse service. So the healthcare system, we interact with it in so many ways, and they're really leading on some interesting ways to make sure that communities with less food access have more food access. It's super exciting to partner with healthcare providers.
All right, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's been such a pleasure.
Yeah, it was great. I can't wait to check in on the roadmap.
Yeah.
All right, and that takes care of another fence. I want to thank the crew behind the scenes here at WCAX who make our program possible. I'm Jolie Whitney. Have a good one.